a young communications specialist who worked in the signals division. "Sir, you need to come to the monitoring station immediately," she said. Her voice was calm, but Morrison had worked with her long enough to hear the tension underneath. "What is it, Lieutenant?" "We are receiving structured signals from space. They are not natural. They are not ours. Sir, I think we have made contact." Morrison was in his car within 2 minutes. By the time he reached the monitoring station, Lawson had already assembled a small team. They were all staring at their screens with expressions that mixed wonder and fear. "Show me," Morrison said. Lawson pointed to a display filled with patterns and frequencies. "These signals started approximately 4 hours ago. They are coming from multiple sources, all approaching Earth at speeds we cannot explain. Our best estimate is that they will reach orbit within 6 hours. Morrison felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Have you told anyone else?" "Command is being notified now. Sir, there is something else." She hesitated. "The signals include fragments of our own radio broadcasts. They have been listening to us. They know our languages, at least partially." 6 hours later, the sky changed forever. The Vectari ships appeared over major cities across the globe. They were enormous, dark shapes that blocked out the sun. People stopped in the streets and looked up. Some screamed, some prayed, some simply stood in silence, unable to process what they were seeing. The broadcast came simultaneously in every major language, though the grammar was imperfect and the tone was strange. It was a demand for immediate and unconditional surrender. The message explained that resistance was pointless. The Vectari had conquered many worlds. Earth would be no different. To prove their seriousness, they destroyed a city in Eastern Europe. One moment it was there, home to hundreds of thousands of people. The next moment it was fire and dust and silence. The world's governments reacted with chaos. Some leaders argued for immediate surrender. What choice did they have? The enemy had weapons beyond anything humans could match. Fighting would only lead to more death. Others disagreed. They pointed out that surrender meant slavery or extinction. At least fighting offered a chance, however small. The debate ended when the Vectari landed their ground forces. 50,000 warriors touched down on 3 continents. They expected the process to be quick. They expected terrified populations to lay down their weapons and accept their new rulers. They were wrong. Sergeant Ben Carter was 26 years old and had served in the military for 5 years. He had seen combat before, but nothing like this. His unit was stationed near one of the landing zones when the Vectari troops began their advance. There were only 30 soldiers in his patrol. The enemy numbered in the thousands. His commanding officer gave the order to fall back and regroup. It was the sensible choice. It was the logical choice. But as Carter watched the alien soldiers march toward a nearby town filled with civilians who had not yet evacuated, he made a different choice. "We hold here," he said. The soldiers around him looked at him with wide eyes. "Sergeant, that is suicide," one of them said. "Maybe," Carter replied, "but those people need time to get out. We can give them that time." They fought for 9 hours. The Vectari had superior weapons, superior armor, and superior numbers. But they had never faced an enemy that simply would not stop. Every time they pushed forward, the humans pushed back. When one soldier fell, another took his position. When they ran low on ammunition, they used knives and rocks and their bare hands. By the time reinforcements arrived, Carter's unit had been reduced to 7 soldiers. They were wounded, exhausted, and nearly out of supplies. But the town behind them was empty. Every civilian had escaped. The Vectari commander who led the assault was confused. In his experience, inferior forces always surrendered when faced with certain death. These humans had done the opposite. They had fought harder as their situation became more desperate. He reported this to High Commander Zorath, who dismissed it as an anomaly. Surely not all humans were this foolish. Within a week, Zorath learned how wrong he was. Reports came in from every landing zone. Human forces, despite being outmatched in every measurable way, were fighting with a ferocity the Vectari had never encountered. They attacked at night. They set traps. They used their knowledge of local terrain to ambush and harass. When captured, they refused to provide information. Some even continued to resist while being held prisoner. Colonel Morrison coordinated the defense efforts from an underground bunker. He had not slept in 3 days. Around him, officers worked frantically, trying to manage a war that was unlike anything humanity had ever faced. "Sir, we are receiving reports from Asia," Lieutenant Lawson said. "A small unit held off a Vectari armored column for 12 hours. They used improvised explosives and civilian vehicles." Morrison nodded. He was not surprised. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They had developed every possible technique for warfare. They knew how to resist, how to adapt, and how to endure. The aliens had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that primitive technology meant primitive spirit. They had looked at humanity's divisions and seen weakness. They had not understood that when threatened from outside, those divisions could disappear in an instant. The war had just begun, and already the Vectari were learning a lesson they would never forget. Fighting humans was not going to be easy, and for many of them, it was going to be the last thing they ever did. Part 2. The Nature of Humans. High Commander Zorath read the casualty reports for the 3rd time. The numbers made no sense. In 2 days of fighting on Earth, his forces had lost more soldiers than they had lost in the entire conquest of the Meridian Cluster. That campaign had taken 3 years and involved 12 different species. All of them had surrendered quickly. All of them had understood that resistance was pointless. These humans did not seem to understand anything. Zorath called a meeting with his senior officers. They gathered in the command chamber of the flagship, their faces showing the same confusion that Zorath felt. One of them, a tactical specialist named Varric, spoke first. "High Commander, I believe we underestimated the humans. Their weapons are primitive, yes, but their tactics are unlike anything in our records. They do not fight like a species should fight." "Explain," Zorath said. Varric pulled up a display showing battle footage from multiple locations. "Watch this engagement from the northern continent. Our forces outnumbered the humans 20-1. Standard doctrine says they should have either surrendered or attempted to flee. Instead, they attacked. They moved through difficult terrain that our sensors could not penetrate. They struck at night when our warriors were resting. They targeted supply lines and communication equipment. The footage showed human soldiers moving through forests like shadows. They appeared from nowhere, fired their weapons, and vanished before the Vectari could respond. It was not honorable combat. It was hunting. They are using the same techniques they developed to fight each other," Varric continued. "Their history is filled with conflict. They have spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing their own kind. Now they are using that knowledge against us." Zorath felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was doubt. Far below, on the surface of Earth, Captain Lisa Grant led her unit through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. 3 weeks ago, she had commanded 60 soldiers. Now she had 23. The others had been killed in the initial Vectari assault. Grant carried their names in her memory like stones. But those deaths had not been meaningless. Grant's unit had learned from every encounter. They had studied the enemy, identified weaknesses, and developed new tactics. The Vectari were stronger and better equipped, but they were also predictable. They followed patterns. They expected certain behaviors from their opponents. When those expectations were violated, they became confused. "Captain, convoy approaching from the east," whispered Corporal Danny Webb, her scout. He was young, barely 20 years old, but he had become one of her best soldiers. Fear had sharpened him. Grant raised her binoculars and watched the Vektari supply convoy move along the damaged highway. 6 hover vehicles, each carrying equipment and ammunition. 2 escort vehicles with mounted weapons. "How many troops?" she asked. "Maybe 40. They are not expecting trouble. This route has been quiet for days." Grant smiled. They had kept this route quiet on purpose, letting the enemy grow comfortable, letting them lower their guard. Tonight, that comfort would kill them. She gave the signal, and her soldiers moved into position. They had spent hours preparing the ambush site. Explosive charges were hidden under the road surface. Snipers were positioned in the trees. Escape routes were planned and memorized. When the convoy reached the kill zone, Grant pressed the detonator. The lead vehicle exploded, blocking the road. The rear vehicle was hit seconds later by a rocket launcher. The convoy was trapped. Grant's soldiers opened fire from multiple directions, targeting the Vektari warriors as they tried to organize a defense. It was over in 4 minutes. 40 enemy soldiers were dead. Grant had lost 2 of her own. She gathered the survivors, collected useful equipment from the wreckage, and disappeared into the forest before Vektari reinforcements could arrive. Hundreds of similar engagements were happening across the planet. Human forces were learning and adapting at a speed that astonished the Vektari. Every battle taught them something new. Every defeat made them more determined. In Geneva, Dr. Sam Porter worked in a secret laboratory analyzing captured Vektari technology. He had not left the building in 2 weeks. Sleep came in short bursts between experiments. Food was something he consumed without tasting. Nothing mattered except understanding the enemy. What he discovered changed everything. "The Vektari have never developed real combat doctrine," he reported to the Emergency Council via secure video link. "Their entire military strategy is based on intimidation. They arrive with overwhelming force, demonstrate their power by destroying something important, and then accept surrender. Every species they have encountered has followed this pattern." "And when species do not surrender?" asked General Morrison, who was attending the meeting from his command bunker. "That is the thing," Porter said. "It has never happened. Not once in their recorded history. They have no concept of prolonged resistance, no understanding of guerrilla warfare, no experience with an enemy that refuses to give up." There was silence as the council absorbed this information. "They are predators who have never met another predator," Porter continued. "Their psychology is built on dominance displays. When those displays fail, they have no alternative strategy. They cannot comprehend an opponent who sees death as acceptable." General Morrison leaned forward. "Can we use this against them?" "We already are. Every time our forces continue fighting despite losses, we are attacking their minds as much as their bodies. They are experiencing something they have no word for: fear." On the Vektari flagship, that fear was spreading. Soldiers who had conquered worlds were now hesitant to go into battle. They whispered among themselves about the humans. They told stories of units that had been wiped out by enemies who should have been easy prey. They spoke of human soldiers who kept fighting even after receiving wounds that should have been fatal. One captured Vektari officer was brought before Morrison for interrogation. Through a translator, he tried to explain what fighting humans felt like. "It is like fighting a wounded animal," he said. "You strike it, and it should fall. But it does not fall. It turns and bites. You strike it again, and it bites harder. No matter how much damage you cause, it does not stop. It cannot stop. It does not know how." Morrison nodded slowly. "That is because we have been wounded before. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. We have looked into the void and refused to blink. Your people have never faced anything like us." The officer lowered his head. "We are beginning to understand this. High Commander Zorath sent a request to the Vektari homeworld. He needed reinforcements, many reinforcements. The Council, confused by the reports from Earth, approved his request without hesitation. They sent 3 additional invasion fleets. They believed that more soldiers would solve the problem. They did not understand that they were simply sending more soldiers to die. The humans were waiting. Part 3. Escalation. 6 months had passed since the first Vektari ships appeared in Earth's sky. The world had changed in ways that no one could have imagined. Cities lay in ruins. Millions had died. Entire regions had been turned into battlefields. And yet, humanity had not surrendered. If anything, the resistance had grown stronger. The Vektari reinforcement fleets arrived with 200,000 fresh troops. They also brought heavier weapons and authorization to use orbital bombardment against civilian populations. The Vektari Council had grown impatient. They wanted this small planet conquered and its troublesome inhabitants subdued. High Commander Zorath ordered a new strategy. Instead of trying to defeat human military forces directly, he would break their will by destroying what they loved. His ships targeted population centers far from the front lines. Cities that had escaped the initial invasion were turned to ash. He expected this to create panic. He expected the humans to finally understand the futility of resistance. He expected surrender. Instead, recruitment centers around the world were overwhelmed with volunteers. Major Chris Hale commanded what remained of the Atlantic Defense Fleet. When the war began, he had led a force of 50 naval vessels. Now, he had 12. But those 12 ships had adapted. They moved constantly, used weather patterns to hide from orbital sensors, and struck at Vektari landing craft with deadly precision. "They keep expecting us to fight fair," Hale told his officers during a strategy meeting. "They form neat lines. They announce their attacks. They follow rules that make sense to them. But war is not about rules. War is about winning." His fleet had developed a technique they called ghost hunting. They would track Vektari transport ships as they descended from orbit, wait until they were committed to a landing approach, and then attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The alien vessels were powerful, but they were slow to change course. Many of them never reached the surface. The Vektari responded by increasing their escort forces. Hale responded by changing tactics. He began using decoys, false signals, and sacrificial ships to draw the escorts out of position. Every time the enemy adapted, the humans adapted faster. On land, the war was equally brutal. Captain Lisa Grant had expanded her operations from a single unit to a network of resistance cells spread across 3 states. They coordinated through coded messages and trusted contacts. They shared intelligence and resources. When one cell was destroyed, others would continue the fight. Grant herself had become something of a legend. Stories spread about the ghost captain who appeared from nowhere, struck without warning, and vanished like smoke. The Vektari put a bounty on her head large enough to buy a small starship. It only made her more famous. In a world that seemed to be falling apart, humans needed heroes. They needed to believe that individuals could make a difference. Grant and soldiers like her provided that belief. But the war took its toll on everyone. Pilot Katie Dunn was flying a reconnaissance mission over the Atlantic when she received word that her hometown had been destroyed. The city where she had grown up, where her parents still lived, where she had learned to ride a bicycle and graduated from high school and fallen in love for the first time, was gone, vaporized by weapons fired from orbit. She continued her mission. What else could she do? There were no tears, not yet. The pain was too deep for tears. It sat in her chest like a block of ice, cold and heavy and impossible to ignore. When she spotted the Vektari command ship, she should have reported its position and returned to base. That was standard procedure. The information would have been valuable, but Katie was no longer thinking about procedures. She thought about her parents. She thought about her little brother who had wanted to be a doctor. She thought about the house where she had grown up, with the big tree in the backyard where she used to climb and pretend she was flying among the stars. She pointed her aircraft at the command ship's hangar bay and pushed the engines to maximum. Her aircraft was small and lightly armed. It should not have been able to cause significant damage to a ship that size. But Katie knew something the Vektari did not. She knew exactly how much fuel remained in her tanks. She knew the precise composition of her aircraft's structure. She knew what would happen when those materials combined with fire in an enclosed space. The explosion tore through 3 decks of the command ship. 200 Vektari warriors died instantly. The ship itself was crippled, forced to withdraw from the battle zone. A single human pilot in a single small aircraft had accomplished what an entire fleet might have struggled to achieve. Her sacrifice was not unique. Across the world, humans were discovering something about themselves. When everything was taken from them, they did not become weak. They became dangerous. Loss did not break them. It sharpened them. Private Nick Torres was 19 years old when his unit was assigned to defend a bridge in Texas. A Vektari armored column was approaching, and the bridge was the only crossing for 50 miles. On the other side, thousands of civilians were still evacuating. His unit was supposed to hold for 2 hours. After that, engineers would destroy the bridge and the civilians would be safe. But the Vektari arrived early, and the battle was fiercer than expected. One by one, the soldiers around Nick fell. After 4 hours, he was the only one left. He could have retreated. The bridge was rigged to blow. He could have triggered the explosives and escaped. But through his binoculars, he could see the evacuation was not complete. There were still people on the road, still families with children trying to reach safety. So he stayed. He fired until he ran out of ammunition. Then he used weapons from fallen soldiers. When those were empty, he threw grenades. When the grenades were gone, he used his knife. When his knife broke, he used his hands. The Vektari eventually overwhelmed him. He had 17 wounds when the medics reached him. By all logic, he should have been dead. But he was still breathing when they loaded him onto the evacuation helicopter. The bridge held for 6 hours. Every civilian made it to safety. When reporters asked Nick why he did not retreat, he seemed confused by the question. His answer was simple. People were counting on him. The Vektari High Command analyzed incidents like these and struggled to understand. Their psychologists created models. Their strategists developed theories. None of them captured the truth. Humans were not fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because surrender was unthinkable. They were fighting because the alternative was to become something less than human. They were fighting because, at the deepest level of their being, they simply did not know how to stop. And the Vektari, who had conquered so many worlds, had no answer for that. Part 4. The Tide Turns. 2 years after the first Vektari ships appeared in the sky, humanity launched its counteroffensive. The aliens had expected the war to last weeks. They had planned for a quick conquest, followed by peaceful occupation. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare that grew worse with every passing day. Admiral Laura Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiance, the flagship of Earth's newly formed defense fleet. The ship had been built in secret, constructed in underground facilities and hidden orbital stations that the Vektari had never discovered. It was humanity's answer to alien technology, a combination of captured Vektari systems and human engineering that produced something neither species could have created alone. "All units report ready," her communications officer announced. "The assault begins on your command, Admiral." Chen looked at the display showing the positions of her fleet. 57 ships, each one crewed by men and women who had lost friends and family to the invasion. They were not fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge. "Begin the attack," she said. Across the planet, human forces struck simultaneously. The coordination was precise to the second, despite the fact that communication between units was limited and often unreliable. The Vektari commanders were baffled. How could separate military forces operating without centralized control execute such perfect timing? They did not understand the concept of trust. Their own military operated on strict hierarchies and direct orders. The idea that soldiers might coordinate through shared understanding and mutual confidence was foreign to them. It was one more human advantage that they had failed to anticipate. Sergeant Megan Price led the ground assault on the primary Vektari base in Central Asia. Her unit had trained for this mission for months, rehearsing every step until it became instinct. They knew the layout of the base from intelligence gathered by resistance networks. They knew the patrol schedules of the guards. They knew where the weak points were. The attack began before dawn, when Vektari alertness was at its lowest. Price's soldiers moved through the outer defenses like water through cracks, eliminating sentries silently and disabling security systems. By the time the alarm was raised, they were already inside the main compound. The fighting was brutal. The Vektari defended their base with desperate ferocity, understanding that this was different from previous engagements. This was not a raid. This was an attempt to destroy them completely. Price lost 8 soldiers in the assault. She knew each of them personally. She knew that Private Marcus Green had a daughter back home who had just turned 3. She knew that Corporal Rita Santos had planned to become a teacher after the war. She knew that Specialist Kevin Park had been engaged to a woman he met at a refugee camp. She carried their names with her as she led the final push into the command center. She carried their faces in her mind as she planted explosives on the main reactor. She carried their dreams in her heart as she gave the order to retreat. When the base exploded behind them, she did not cheer. She simply felt the weight of what the victory had cost, and she promised herself that their sacrifices would not be wasted. Similar scenes played out across the globe. Human forces attacked every major Vektari position with overwhelming force and relentless determination. Bases that had stood for months were overrun in hours. Supply lines that had seemed secure were cut. Communications networks were disrupted, leaving Vektari units isolated and confused. In orbit, Admiral Chen's fleet engaged the remaining Vektari warships. The battle was the largest in human history, involving hundreds of vessels and thousands of fighters. The aliens still had numerical superiority, but they no longer had the advantage of surprise or technological dominance. The hybrid weapons developed by Dr. Porter's team performed beyond expectations. Energy shields that should have been impenetrable were overloaded by specially designed pulse weapons. Engines that should have been untouchable were targeted by missiles that used Vektari tracking technology against itself. Every weakness that had been identified over 2 years of warfare was exploited mercilessly. High Commander Zorath watched the battle from his flagship with growing horror. His fleet was being destroyed. His ground forces were being routed. The invasion that should have been a simple conquest had become a catastrophe beyond anything he could have imagined. He thought about the reports he had dismissed, the warnings he had ignored. He thought about the soldiers who had told him that fighting humans was different, that something about this species made them fundamentally unlike any enemy the Vektari had faced. He had called them cowards. He had accused them of making excuses for failure. Now he understood that they had been telling the truth. The humans did not fight like a species defending their territory. They fought like something much more dangerous. They fought with creativity and adaptability, changing tactics faster than the Vektari could respond. They fought with a willingness to sacrifice that bordered on madness. They fought with a unity that emerged not from orders or hierarchy, but from something deeper. They fought with love. That was what Zorath had failed to understand. The humans were not fighting for abstract concepts like victory or honor. They were fighting for each other, for families and friends and communities. For the person standing next to them in the trench, for the memory of those who had fallen. It was a motivation that the Vektari, with their rigid social structures and transactional relationships, could not comprehend. And because they could not comprehend it, they could not defeat it. Zorath watched as another one of his warships broke apart under concentrated human fire. He watched as escape pods launched from crippled vessels, only to be captured by human ships rather than destroyed. Even in victory, the humans showed restraint. They took prisoners. They offered mercy. That frightened him more than anything else. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel to the homeworld. Highest priority." The message he sent was unlike anything in Vectari military history. It was an admission of defeat, a warning, a plea. "Do not send more forces," he dictated. "Do not engage this species further. We have lost. We have been utterly and completely defeated by a people who should not have been able to resist us. They are not what we thought they were. They are not primitives. They are not weak. They are the most dangerous thing we have ever encountered." He paused, searching for words that would convey the truth of what he had witnessed. "Fighting humans is suicide. Withdraw all forces immediately, and pray to whatever gods we believe in that they do not follow us home." Part 5. The New Order. The Vectari withdrawal was not a negotiation. It was a surrender imposed by force. Human ships pursued the retreating alien fleet to the edge of the solar system, capturing vessels, weapons, and technology. More importantly, they captured star charts, records of other civilizations, and knowledge of the wider galaxy. Humanity had proven itself in the fire of war. Now it was time to decide what kind of species they would become. General Jake Morrison, who had led Earth's defense from the beginning, stood before the newly formed Galactic Council. The chamber was vast, filled with representatives from 30 different species. Many of them had been conquered by the Vectari. Others had lived in fear of invasion for generations. All of them had heard the stories about humanity. They looked at Morrison with a mixture of curiosity and fear. This was a representative of the species that had done the impossible, the species that had broken the unbreakable Vectari Empire, the species that fought like no other in recorded history. "You ask why we fought," Morrison said, his voice steady and calm. "The answer is simple. We have always fought. We fight disease, we fight nature, we fight each other, we fight death itself. Fighting is not what we do, it is what we are. We do not know how to stop." The delegates listened in silence. Some of them had tentacles instead of limbs. Some had exoskeletons that glittered under the lights. Some had multiple eyes that blinked in strange patterns. But all of them were focused on the human standing before them. "For most of our history, we turned this instinct against ourselves," Morrison continued. "We invented weapons. We built armies. We destroyed cities and civilizations. We came close to ending our own existence more than once. We are not proud of this. It is a flaw in our nature that we struggle with constantly." He paused, looking around the chamber. "But it is also our greatest strength. When the Vectari came, we did not have to learn how to fight. We already knew. We had practiced for thousands of years. Every tactic they used, we had already countered. Every weapon they deployed, we had already defended against. They thought they were fighting primitives. They were fighting the most experienced warriors in the galaxy." A murmur passed through the assembly. The Vectari representative, attending under guard, lowered his head. "However," Morrison said, "we are capable of something else. We know how to make peace. We know how to cooperate. We know how to build. The same stubbornness that makes us dangerous in war makes us valuable as allies. We will defend those who cannot defend themselves. We will stand against any aggressor, and we will never, ever abandon a friend in need." He stepped back, and Ambassador Sophia Blake took his place. She was a diplomat, not a soldier. But she had spent the war years organizing refugee networks and negotiating ceasefires. She understood both the horror of conflict and the hope of resolution. "The Vectari made a mistake," she said, her voice gentle but clear. "They saw our divisions and thought we were weak. They saw our technology and thought we were primitive. They saw our short lifespans and thought we were insignificant. They did not understand that our greatest strength has never been our weapons or our numbers. She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. Our greatest strength is our refusal to accept defeat. It is our ability to sacrifice for each other. It is the bonds we form with those we love. The Vectari have 1,000 words for conquest and domination. They have no word for what humans call love, and that is why they lost. The council voted later that day. The decision was unanimous. Humanity would be accepted into the galactic community, not as a junior member to be watched and contained, but as a full partner with equal standing. In the years that followed, no species attacked human territory. The lesson of the Vectari War had been learned by everyone, but something unexpected happened as well. Humans began to be requested as mediators in conflicts across the galaxy. At first, this seemed strange. Why would species want the most warlike civilization in known space to resolve their disputes? But the logic became clear over time. Humans understood conflict better than anyone. They knew how wars started, how they escalated, and how they ended. They knew the cost of fighting and the value of peace. More importantly, they could be trusted to enforce agreements. When a human diplomat said that violations would have consequences, everyone believed them. The threat did not even need to be stated explicitly. The memory of what had happened to the Vectari was fresh in every mind. Captain Lisa Grant, who had led guerrilla forces during the invasion, became the first human commander of a joint peacekeeping fleet. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went. Conflicts that had simmered for centuries were resolved within months of her arrival. Private Nick Torres, the young soldier who had held a bridge against impossible odds, became a symbol of human determination. He spent years traveling to different worlds, sharing his story and inspiring others. He never fully recovered from his wounds, but he considered that a fair price for what he had helped save. Dr. Sam Porter continued his research into alien technology, now working alongside scientists from dozens of species. The knowledge exchange accelerated progress in every field. Within a generation, diseases that had been incurable were eliminated. Energy was abundant and clean. The standard of living for most beings in the galaxy improved dramatically. And Admiral Laura Chen, who had led the counteroffensive that broke the Vectari invasion, retired to a small house on the coast of California. She tended a garden, watched the ocean, and occasionally received visits from former soldiers who wanted to thank her. During one such visit, a young officer asked her what she thought humanity's future would be. Chen considered the question for a long time before answering. "We spent our whole history fighting," she said. "Fighting each other, fighting nature, fighting ourselves. When the Vectari came, we finally had an enemy that united us. We discovered what we could do when we worked together instead of against each other." She looked out at the waves. "Now we have a choice. We can become conquerors like the Vectari were. We have the power. We have the skills. We could build an empire that spans the galaxy. Some people think we should." She shook her head slowly. "But I think we are better than that. I think the same strength that helped us win the war can help us build something lasting. Not an empire based on fear, but a community based on trust. Not peace enforced by weapons, but peace maintained by friendship." She turned to face the young officer. "The galaxy feared us because we were dangerous. Now they respect us because we choose not to be. That is the greatest victory of all. Not defeating our enemies, but becoming something more than warriors. Becoming protectors. Becoming friends. Becoming human." The officer nodded, understanding. Outside, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere far above, human ships patrolled the stars, keeping watch over a galaxy that had once been filled with fear. Fighting humans had been suicide. but becoming their friend meant you would never stand alone.